Imagine this. You land in Mongolia and everywhere you look you see one face. On money, on vodka bottles, on a giant metal horse in the middle of the steppe. That face is Genghis Khan, the founding father, the national logo, basically the Mongolian version of George Washington plus a Marvel superhero combined. Now fly to Beijing, open a history textbook, and you'll see something surprising. Genghis Khan shows up there too, as a Chinese emperor of the Yuan dynasty. Mongolia calls him our father. China calls him our emperor. So, who actually gets to claim him? On paper, it sounds like a nerdy history debate. In reality, it's about borders, minorities, and who gets to define the nation in the 21st century. So in this video, we're going to ask a simple but uncomfortable question. Who owns Genghis Khan? Mongolia or China? To answer that, we have to go back to a time before China and Mongolia even existed as modern nation-states. Back then, there were no passports, no national flags, just steppe confederations, Chinese courts, and empires stitched together by war. Genghis Khan didn't wake up in the morning thinking, I am a proud citizen of Mongolia or China. He thought, I am the Khan of the Mongols and the world is up for grabs. The problem starts when modern states, centuries later, try to drag that medieval conqueror into their 21st century national story. Let's start in Mongolia, where Genghis Khan isn't just history and he's identity. For Mongolians, Genghis Khan is the man who took scattered steppe clans and turned them into one political community. He didn't found the Republic of Mongolia, but he did something just as important. He made us feel like us. Over centuries, he slowly moved from warlord to legend, and even into something like a sacred figure in Mongolian memory. Then came the socialist era, when talking too loudly about national heroes was not exactly encouraged. Genghis Khan was still there, but in the background. Like a family photo you're not supposed to hang on the living room wall. Then the 1990s hit. Mongolia opened up, democracy arrived, and Genghis Khan came roaring back into the spotlight. Suddenly his face was on the money, on the airport, on hotels, on vodka, on banks. Basically, Genghis Khan became the national brand. For a small country between Russia and China, that brand matters. It says, we're not just a buffer zone. We are the descendants of a world empire. If you erase Genghis Khan from Mongolian history, you don't just delete a chapter. You rip out the entire front cover. That's why Mongolians get nervous when anyone, especially a powerful neighbor, starts claiming their founding father as also ours. It's like someone showing up and saying, hey, your dad? Actually, he's also my dad. And by the way, I'll be handling the family history from now on. So when China lists Genghis Khan as part of Chinese civilization, Mongolians don't hear shared heritage. They hear partial takeover. To understand why, we have to switch perspectives and see how China tells the story of Genghis Khan. Because China isn't just saying he invaded us. China is saying very clearly, he ruled us, therefore he is one of us. And once you accept that logic, a lot of other political claims start to make more sense, at least from Beijing's point of view. It's not just about a statue on a horse, it's about who gets to draw the big family tree of East Asia. And China's version of that family tree has a very specific label on top. Zhonghua Minzu, the Chinese nation. In Chinese textbooks, the story goes like this. Song, Yuan, Ming, Qing, one long line of Chinese dynasties. Yes, some dynasties were ruled by non-Han peoples, Mongols, Manchus, but the land they ruled is today's China, so they are Chinese dynasties. From that perspective, the Yuan dynasty, founded by Genghis Khan's grandson Kublai, is just one more chapter in Chinese history. And if Yuan is a Chinese dynasty, then its founding family, the Mongol imperial house, can be narrated as part of the Chinese story. This is where the modern concept of Zhonghua Minzu comes in, the Chinese nation made up of 56 official ethnic groups. In this framework, Mongols are officially one of those 56 groups, alongside Han, Manchu, Uyghur, Tibetan, and others. So the logic goes like this. Mongols are part of Zhonghua Minzu. Genghis Khan is the greatest Mongol leader. Therefore, he is also a great hero of the Chinese nation. On a PowerPoint slide, that chain of reasoning looks clean and elegant. On the ground, it's much messier. Because historically, Mongol elites under the Yuan did not see Han Chinese as fellow nationals. They saw them as conquered subjects, ranked below them in law and status. The Yuan system famously divided people into four groups: Mongols, various peoples from Central and West Asia, Northern Chinese, and finally Southern Chinese at the bottom. That's not exactly what you'd expect if everyone thought they were one family back then. So, when modern China rewrites this as a glorious chapter of our multi-ethnic unity, Mongolian ears hear something different. It sounds less like shared pride and more like a powerful neighbor saying, "By the way, your greatest hero? He's also on our team." This doesn't mean China is lying about history. It means China is arranging history around a very specific modern political project. That project is to define all the peoples inside its current borders, including Mongols, as one big national family with a very long, very unified past. And once you accept that story, claims over territory, language policy, and even museum exhibitions start to sound more natural. The question is, what happens when people outside that story, in independent Mongolia, for example, don't agree to the casting? That's when history stops being just about the past and turns into a diplomatic headache in the present. And you can see that headache bursting to the surface in three modern arenas: language, UNESCO, and a French museum. Let's start with the language, because nothing gets closer to identity than the words you use at school. In 2020, parents and students in China's Inner Mongolia region took to the streets. The government had announced that key subjects in schools would shift from Mongolian to standard Mandarin Chinese. On paper, it was framed as improving national language skills. On the ground, many Mongols saw it as a slow erasure of their identity. These were, in their own eyes, the descendants of Genghis Khan, protesting to keep their kids learning in the language of their ancestors. Beijing, however, sees these same people as part of Zhonghua Minzu, citizens of a unified Chinese nation whose main language should be Mandarin. The clash isn't just about textbooks. It's about whether Genghis Khan is the hero of a minority inside China or of a separate nation next door. A second battlefield is UNESCO, specifically the registration of Mongolian throat singing and other traditions as cultural heritage. Both Mongolia and China have sought recognition for similar practices. One is Mongolian, the other is Chinese Mongolian. To outsiders, this can look like petty branding. To locals, it raises a serious fear. Will our culture end up being labeled as Chinese on the global stage? Then there's the French Museum incident. In 2020, a museum in Nantes planned a big exhibition on Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire. Chinese partners reportedly asked the museum to remove words like Genghis Khan, Mongol, and Empire from the title and text. For the museum, this crossed a line from cultural cooperation into political censorship, and they suspended the show. Once again, the core issue wasn't just vocabulary, it was, who gets to define how the world talks about Genghis Khan? Mongolia is a small state with a huge historical figure. China is a huge state with a strong desire to fold that figure into its own story. That asymmetry is exactly why the two narratives don't feel like sharing to many Mongolians. They feel like being overwritten. To make that feeling more intuitive, let's borrow a story from Europe, one with a very familiar Roman face. Think about Julius Caesar, the Roman general who conquered Gaul, roughly today's France and Belgium. For Romans, he was a military genius and a key figure in their history. For the people he conquered, he was not exactly a national hero. Now imagine modern France suddenly declaring, Caesar is the founding father of France. He brought civilization to us. Rome would probably say, excuse me, that's our guy. And many French people would also ask, wait, the invader is our founding father now? That weird feeling, the conqueror is suddenly our father, is very close to what many Mongolians feel when China calls Genghis Khan a great Chinese emperor. From Beijing's perspective, the logic is clean. Yuan was a Chinese dynasty. Mongols are one of China's peoples. Therefore, Genghis Khan is also our hero. From Ulaanbaatar's perspective, it can sound like someone taking the main character of your national story and rebranding him with a different flag. This is not unique to East Asia. Spain and Mexico argue over the memory of Cortés. Britain and South Africa argue over Cecil Rhodes. Greece and North Macedonia argue over Alexander. But East Asia adds one more layer, a strong tradition of tying dynasties, territory, and modern ethnic identity into one uninterrupted line. If a dynasty once ruled what is now China, that dynasty is often written as Chinese. If a people once lived inside that map, They risk being retroactively absorbed into Chinese civilization. That's how you get arguments that Genghis Khan, the Khitan, or even ancient kingdoms like Goguryeo are all somehow part of the Chinese family story. To be fair, other countries do similar things with their own heroes, but when a superpower does it, smaller neighbors pay much closer attention. For Mongolia, the fear isn't that people will forget Genghis Khan. The fear is that people will remember him, just not as Mongolian. So when we ask, is Genghis Khan Chinese or Mongolian? The real question underneath is, who gets to own the story of empire? And that question doesn't end with Genghis Khan. It touches Hong Kong, Xinjiang, Tibet, Taiwan, and even how China talks about places like Korea and Central Asia. In other words, this isn't just a fan war over a historical celebrity. It's a preview of 21st century geopolitics. So who owns Genghis Khan? Mongolia, because he was their first great state builder? China, because his empire became part of its dynastic timeline? The honest answer is uncomfortable. Historically, he belongs to neither, and to everyone. He was a Mongol Khan who smashed states from China to Persia. His empire reshaped trade, disease, technology, and politics across Eurasia. But modern nation-states hate that kind of answer. They want clean borders in the past as well as in the present. So they recruit dead emperors, philosophers, and warriors into national teams. Our scientist, our poet, our conqueror. Sometimes that's harmless pride. Sometimes it becomes a way to justify power over land and people today. With Genghis Khan, we are watching both at once. A small nation clinging to its founding hero, and a big nation folding that hero into a much larger imperial narrative. You don't have to pick a side, but you do have to notice how the story is being edited. So next time you hear that Genghis Khan is Chinese, or that some ancient kingdom was always part of this or that country, pause for a second. Ask yourself, is this about understanding the past or about comforting the present? History doesn't belong to nations. Nations are temporary users of history. Genghis Khan doesn't need a modern passport, but modern states desperately want his name on their passport cover. Maybe the most honest way to remember him is this. He was a Mongol who changed the world, and everyone else is still arguing over what that change means. And in that argument, we can learn more about our own anxieties today than about a man who died 800 years ago. So who owns Genghis Khan? Maybe the better question is, who owns the future story we're going to tell about him? And why do they want that power so badly?